All right, it's time to talk basketball. It is the off season. We are enjoying some phenomenal Olympic basketball. The men won the gold, the women won the gold today in a really good game. Hope you got a chance to see it. But we are here today to talk NBA greats. I'm Jose Salviati, editor at thebeachbasket.net. He's Steve Prisciello, longtime educator, vice principal, high school coach, and athletic director. And this is the 13 Rules Random NBA Thoughts Overtime podcast. This is the show where we are going to discuss NBA stars from the 60s, 70s, and 80s by talking about them with someone who actually watched them play, which is kind of cool, and it makes all the difference in the world. I want to know what made these guys special. These are players you've heard about, players you know, but you never got to see play, just like me in most cases. Which player today most resembles that player? What is Steve's greatest memory about that player? To date, we've discussed some of the greats in the NBA: Wilt Chamberlain, Sam Jones, Rick Barry, Pistol Pete Maravich, Jerry West, John Havlicek, and Bill Russell. We'll see if we can't link all of those shows. So if you missed one, you can catch up. Today, though, we're going to discuss someone who held what many believe to be an unbreakable achievement in the NBA, averaging a triple-double for an entire season. Nobody came close to doing that after this guy did it until someone did it. And I think that's what makes, at least to me, that's what makes this guy's achievement kind of interesting. We'll talk about it. This player was an NBA champion in 71, MVP in 64, 12-time All-Star, 3-time All-Star MVP, 9-time All-Star, or pardon me, All-NBA first team, 2-time second team NBA Rookie of the Year in a class that had Jerry West, which tells you something, 6-time NBA assist leader. Today we're discussing the Big O, Oscar Robertson. What made him special? What player most resembles his style of play? And what is the greatest memory of watching Oscar play? And it's neat because, to date, Steve, as you and I have talked about this, we talked about a lot of Lakers, we talked about a lot of Celtics, and it's understandable. These guys, these franchises kind of own the NBA in terms of wins. But there were other phenomenal players, and Oscar definitely falls into that category. Let's start with what made him special. What made Oscar so special?
He did everything. He could do everything. He can shoot. He can pass. He can play defense. He just did it all on the court. He was big, 6'5", which was a big guard back then, and he was physical. And he had a bigger body, so it wasn't easy to even defend him. He had a little move where he'd back you down by the foul line and just shoot a little turnaround. The story on that, when we were, I guess, in high school, we went over to see. It was near the end of the year. The Knicks were playing Cincinnati in the Garden, and before the game, they come out and shoot. And there's Oscar, and before the three, of course, he's shooting. Somebody's feeding him the ball. A foot behind the foul line. He must have made about 10 or 15 straight. Just like a joke. And everything was right down the net. Not even a rim. I mean, it was just, and you're sitting there, and my friend turned to me and said, "This is great. This guy is amazing." Because, nobody shot. We never saw anybody shoot like that at that time. So that gives you a little taste of him. Now, my early recollections were only on TV. And we didn't get a lot of games then. So it was more difficult to see him. I saw him with the Bucks in the playoffs against Boston, and as well as winning the playoffs against Baltimore. I want to go back to something, though, that's very interesting. He played on a team at Crispus Attucks High School. They lost in the finals, Indiana State Finals, because he grew up in Indianapolis. They lost to Milan High School in 1954. Now, that Milan High School, that was the beginnings of how they made the movie Hoosiers. That was that losing that game was the beginning of it. Now, his last 2 years, I think they went 30-something and one, and then they undefeated. They won 45 straight games. They won 2 straight Indiana State championships. They won, like I said, 45 straight games. First all black school, Crispus Attucks High School, for all black to win the whole thing in Indiana. I mean, he was amazing. He went to a segregated school. Then he went to the University of Cincinnati. At Cincinnati, they were in the Final Four, 4 years, never won it. But they were there. And by the way, if you heard Oscar talk, there's a little tinge of sarcasm and anger in him. And it goes back to being when he went to Cincinnati, he went in the South. They played schools in the South, and they were segregated. He had to stay in different dorms, not the hotel rooms, and that always built a crutch or an anger in him throughout his career and his life. So that was it. And then one other thing, in 1960, played on the Olympic team. He and Jerry West were the captains. They had a guy by the name of Jerry Lucas on the team, Walt Bellamy. These are Hall of Famers. Another guy, Terry Dishinger, who was a real good shooter, played on that same team. So they were loaded with players, and they won the Olympics in '60. That's coming off Bill Russell's '56 Olympics. So and that was when only college players could play.
Right.
And quiz to you: what was the first time pros could play in the Olympics? I'm waiting for your answer.
Oh, you know what? You cut out a little. I didn't hear your question.
When was the first time professional basketball players could play in the Olympics?
I know I'm going off memory here because I could look it up. I'm not going to, but I know that we were challenged. We were challenged one time, and people took offense to that. And so that's when they said, the pros are going to come. So that was Magic, Jordan, Bird, 1992.
That's right. That's right.
Boom.
I think in '88 we didn't do well, but anyway, back then all college players played, and he was on this team, and then he went to the NBA, played with Cincinnati, and the Royals were like the bridesmaids. They always did well. I think he was the MVP in '64, but they always lost to Boston. Always lost, and they had a good team. They had him and Jerry Lucas, Adrian Smith, Jack Twyman. Twyman's a Hall of Famer. Lucas a Hall of Famer. They had some good players. Arlen Bobcorn and who was a Boozer, another Boozer played. They had some good teams, but they weren't quite good enough to beat Boston. Never beat Boston. And then in '70, I guess '69, '70, Bob Cousy became the coach. Now Bob Cousy was retired for quite a while. Bob Cousy decided to come out of retirement, and he played a little bit. Some say it was because of the crowds. So now you had a backcourt at times. I think they did it 7 times, Cousy and Oscar Robertson. Now, one of my memories would be when the Knicks won the title in '70. They beat that team from out west. When they won that title.
You're not going to name them?
No, I can't remember. It's obscure. But in '70, when the Knicks won it, the Knicks went on a 20-game winning streak or somewhere around that. But at one point, they were going to set the record. They're playing Cincinnati. Cincinnati's winning by, let's say, 7 to 10 points with about a minute left. Cousy puts himself in the game. Cincinnati blows the game. Cousy made a couple turnovers where I lived. And the Knicks continued their winning streak. And that was one of the early memories I have of him. Then he went to the Bucks. First year they won a title with beating, I believe they beat the Bullets in 4 straight. Now the Bullets, they were in the West and the Bullets were in the East. So they were able to, now they're both Eastern Conference teams. But they won 4 straight to win the finals. And then Oscar stayed around for 3 more years and they never won it. They lost to the Boston Celtics in '74 in 7 great games, but they never did win it again. Oscar's numbers retired by number 14 in Cincinnati, number 1 with Milwaukee. So he was retired twice. He went into the first NCAA College Basketball Hall of Fame. Him, pretty good people with him. Russell, Wooden, and Naismith. So, that's a nice opening class. But again, it tells you how great he was in college.
Yeah.
First 5 years of the NBA, by the way, first 5 years, total stats, average a triple-double. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that he was just one of the greatest ever that ever played the game. Obviously, in our day, Robertson and West were considered the two best guards to ever play the game, better than Cousy. And then you had this guy coming along, Walt Frazier, who people thought was getting into that class.
Yeah. I want to focus on, you started by saying he could do everything. And that's kind of a common thread, right? All the greats that we talk about, we kind of start there, right? Because Oscar, Jerry West, to me, I never knew him as a great defender, but you started Jerry West, the same thing. He could do it all. Oscar could do it all. I didn't think of Oscar as a great defender, but the triple doubles, for me as a fan, that was always kind of the unbreakable, incredible achievement. We've never seen anybody do that before. So when Oscar came into the league, did he change the game? Right? You said he was 6'5". I didn't even realize he was that big. Was that a monumental shift in the way the game was played, or no?
No, I don't think. I think honestly, I was a little young for that, but I think Russell was the guy who really changed the game with his ability to block shots and bring defense into the conversation.
Yeah.
So I don't look at it as that way, because they didn't, and they were always the bridesmaids. So they weren't looked upon in that in that way. But he was just considered a great player. And the amazing thing, I can't emphasize this, in today's game, if you had a team with Oscar, Jerry Lucas, Jack Twyman, they'd be competing for a title. That's a big three. Yeah. And then, they couldn't get past Boston. So, in those are so people back then in basketball, again, and I can emphasize this, in the 1950s and 60s when Russell was there, Boston Garden only drew about 8,000 or 9,000 a game. And this is in an arena that's twice as big. So it kind of tells you, where basketball was at the time.
Right.
So I don't think people spent a lot of time discussing basketball the way we do now. And I don't think it was nearly as popular a sport as it is now. And again, football was moving along as becoming the best sport, but baseball was the king. In fact, Oscar was supposedly a pretty good baseball player, but he liked basketball better. So, a lot of young athletes, everybody played baseball then, more so than anything else. So basketball wasn't looked upon in the same way or with the same love that other sports were.
Right. And I'm also focused on, you start off by saying his team was, always the bridesmaids. And I think about kind of some modern teams, right? The New York Knicks had some great teams, couldn't get past the Bulls, right? The Utah Jazz had some great teams, couldn't get past the Bulls, couldn't get past the Lakers. There were some really, 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 really good teams that if it wasn't for some special teams in Boston and LA, more often than not, they would be kind of more revered. Do you think Cincinnati falls into that category?
I think they do, and if you were analytical and you know a little bit about that time. However, nobody's analytical in the 60s or 50s of basketball.
Right, yeah.
And delve that deep into it. It really, it was a time when they played the season, but you always figured it'd be Boston and LA. And
it always was.
Yeah, so I don't think, and again, and I don't know well enough, but my memory tells me that usually Wilt, Boston, or the Lakers were on the Sunday game of the week against somebody.
Yeah.
So that tells me something, about where the game stood, and how the NBA tried to sell their game back then.
Sure.
Don't forget, we're in a time when those games didn't come on until, delayed. The finals were delayed.
Right.
So you didn't even, until Bird and Johnson came along, we didn't even think about this stuff, and only the diehard, tried and true basketball fan would
Yeah.
would really, talk about it.
Yeah. Boggles the mind. Well, talking about, the modern game, this is absolutely my favorite part of this segment. And while I ask it, we're going to go ahead and put up some highlights of the Big O. Um, who today is the player that comes closest to the type of game Big O had?
Offensively, I would say Westbrook, but the Big O was a much better shooter than Westbrook. Westbrook is at best an average shooter. Um, but with the stats and all, I would say Westbrook. But the thing about it again, how many NBA players today don't have great players? They all have flawed games. Think about some of the great players. Not many of them played both ends of the court. And if they did, they didn't rebound well. They didn't pass well. There was always something missing. There wasn't anything missing with these people.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different. They went out and they guarded. They did all the things you're supposed to. And nobody was worried. And again, I didn't check out the minutes for Oscar. But if you check out the minutes for these guys, now, and again, we'll use Tibbs with the Knicks. If somebody's playing over 36 minutes a game, he's getting criticized. Back then,
Yeah.
I mean, you just played, and nobody worried about it. So it was totally different way.
I happen to have that up, so really, really good timing. In his 20s, he averaged 40 minutes, 41 minutes, 39, 38, 38, 36, and 34. Now, in his 30s, he dipped a little, 37, 34, 32, 28, and 26. But yeah, still, this guy, if the clock was running, he was on the court.
Well, at the end, when he played with the Bucks, he was getting heavy, and he wasn't the star he was, but they needed him. In fact, that's when Milwaukee found, and he became like a little bit of a Mickey Davis, I believe it was, who as a point guard played for Oscar, and they because Oscar wasn't getting the minutes he was getting before, and they liked him. And by the way, on that Buck team that I believe won the title, Larry Costello was the coach. Famous person was the assistant coach. Hubie Brown.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Hubie Brown.
He's still calling games.
Well, yeah, he's in his 90s. But Hubie Brown won a title with the Kentucky Colonels and then became an assistant in the NBA, I believe, with the Bucks, with Larry Costello.
Wow.
So, a little, I believe. I hope I'm right.
But, we'll fact check you.
Yeah.
All right, let's end here. What I found most interesting about Oscar, right, is again that triple-double thing. Growing up, for me personally, that's how I knew him. That's how I always heard about him. And we never thought anybody would average triple-double until Russell Westbrook did, who, I think, is the player, who you certainly draw that comparison. But I love the fact that you called out Oscar was a better shooter. But what's unique to me, interesting, maybe is a better word about Oscar, every player we've talked about to date kind of had a hallmark moment, right? Jerry West shot, Wilt's finger roll, Bill Russell, dominating on, in that win in 1969. But I can't think of a highlight. We just saw some highlights for Oscar, but there was no particular play, no game winner, right?
Because they didn't win. They didn't win. There it is. So they didn't have that. The only time they won is with the Bucks. And don't forget, he had this guy that wasn't a bad player by the name of Jabbar playing with him.
Yeah.
So
Lou Alcindor at the time, wasn't it?
Yes. I don't know if he switched by then, but yeah. And then they also had Bob Dandridge, who became a Hall of Famer, I believe, also. So they were pretty good. And he was the finishing touches because he was a leader. Don't forget, Jabbar was young. And Dandridge was young. So they needed that leader to win games.
Yeah.
And at the time, and think about this, he was traded for Flynn Robinson and Charlie Polk. Now, no draft picks, nothing else. Now think about today in the NBA, if you have a guard that's a little bit past his prime, but a great player, what a team might get for him as
Yeah.
compared to that.
Right.
I mean, so the game was completely different
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
By the way, one more piece to that. Oscar was a territorial draft pick. Back then, the NBA, if you grew up in an area, the area you could take that guy in the first round. Tommy Heinsohn went to Holy Cross. He ended up a Celtic. So it was an advantage. The old rumors were Red Auerbach tried to talk Wilt into going to school up in the Boston area so that he could get Wilt. So that tells you, a little bit about it.
That's interesting. That is interesting. I've always heard the term territorial. I never knew really knew what it was. I think that kind of had phased out by the time I became, interested in the game. So very, very interesting. Well, that's it. I mean, I'm sure we could talk a lot more about Oscar. Fascinating career. Did something that only a couple of people have done, which in and of itself is pretty amazing. Phenomenal player. Hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Oscar Robertson. Let us know if you want to discuss a player that we haven't talked about yet. We've got a couple of weeks before the season starts, so we'll find more players to talk about. We'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, we're grateful you found us. Please like, subscribe. That stuff matters, and it goes a long way. Make sure to join us next week when we discuss another NBA great on 13 rules overtime. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.